I'm Rebecca Morgan, 32 years old, and until last year, I thought family meant unconditional love. When my grandmother left me her Victorian house, I never imagined it would become the battleground for the most devastating betrayal of my life. My father and his wife always seemed dismissive of my inheritance, but I never expected they'd change my locks while I was away. Claiming the house for my pregnant stepsister, Jennifer, I came home to find strangers living in my home, with my photos torn from walls and my life packed into boxes. Before I tell you how I turned my family's betrayal into their biggest regret, let me know where you're watching from. And hit that subscribe button if you've ever had to stand up against your own family. Growing up, my mother was my everything. Catherine Morgan was warmth personified, the kind of mom who baked cookies for the entire neighborhood and never missed a single school event. Her mother, my grandmother Eleanor, was cut from the same cloth. When Mom was diagnosed with aggressive breast cancer when I was 15, Grandma Eleanor moved in with us, becoming my rock during those turbulent months. The day my mother died, something in my father broke. Robert Morgan had always been the more distant parent, loving but reserved, focused on his real estate business. But after Mom passed, he became a shell of himself. I understood his grief. Truly I did. What 16-year-old wouldn't? But while I was still choosing flowers for my mother's funeral, Dad was already withdrawing from our shared pain. Rebecca, everyone handles grief differently. Grandma Eleanor would tell me, her eyes sad, but voice strong. Your father is struggling to find his way without Catherine. I nodded and tried to understand, but understanding became nearly impossible when 11 months after Mom's funeral, Dad introduced me to Diane, a divorced client from his real estate business with whom he'd been spending time. 3 months later, they were married in a courthouse ceremony I barely remember attending. Diane brought her 13-year-old daughter Jennifer into our home. While Diane was calculated and cold toward me from day one, Jennifer seemed different. Quieter, watchful, sometimes even kind when her mother wasn't looking. She once secretly returned a necklace of my mother's that Diane had accidentally thrown away during one of her cleaning sprees. I found this in the trash, she whispered, pressing the gold locket into my palm. I thought you might want it back. Through those first difficult years, Grandma Eleanor's Victorian house became my sanctuary. Located just 20 minutes from our new, blended family home, I spent every weekend possible with her, baking in her sun-drenched kitchen and curling up in the window seat of what had once been my mother's childhood bedroom. This house has sheltered 4 generations of women in our family, Grandma would say, running her hand along the intricately carved banister. There's power in these walls, Becca. They remember all of us. I threw myself into education, graduating high school with honors and earning a scholarship to study architecture. Even during college, I returned to Grandma's house whenever possible. Unlike my father's new home, with its modern furnishings and Diane's strict rules about keeping things pristine, Grandma's house was lived in, warm, and filled with memories. When Grandma passed away peacefully in her sleep, the month after my 28th birthday, I was devastated, but not surprised to learn she'd left the Victorian house to me. To Rebecca, who understands what these walls have witnessed, her will stated, Dad and Diane attended the reading with pinched expressions, clearly expecting the property to be divided or sold. Well, I suppose you'll be selling it, Diane said, afterward, her tone suggesting this was the only logical outcome. It's far too much upkeep for a single woman with your career demands. Actually, I'm moving in, I replied, watching her carefully mask disappointment. I'm going to restore it properly, just like Grandma always wanted. And that's exactly what I did. For 3 years, I poured my architectural knowledge and every spare dollar into thoughtfully updating Grandma's house while preserving its character. New plumbing, carefully restored hardwood floors, updated electrical wiring, and a kitchen that maintained its vintage charm while incorporating modern conveniences. I preserved the stained glass window in the landing that had been there since 1892 and the clawfoot tub in the upstairs bathroom where I'd taken bubble baths as a child. Meanwhile, Jennifer had gone to college, graduated with a business degree, and moved back to town. We occasionally met for coffee, maintaining a cordial relationship that felt separate from my strained interactions with Dad and Diane. Jennifer seemed genuinely interested in my renovation projects, and sometimes even offered to help paint or choose fixtures. "You've made this place even more beautiful," she said once, running her fingers along the newly restored crown molding. "Grandma Eleanor would have loved what you've done." I smiled at her use of Grandma Eleanor, a small acknowledgement of the family connection we technically shared, even if we'd never truly been sisters. Looking back, I should have recognized that calculating gleam in her eye when she surveyed each room, so similar to her mother's expression. But I wanted to believe someone from Dad's new family could appreciate what this house meant to me. Life was good. My architecture firm was thriving. My home was becoming everything I'd dreamed. And I'd even started dating again after focusing so intensely on my career. I'd created a peaceful existence centered around honoring my mother's and grandmother's memories while building my own path forward. If only I'd recognized the warning signs of what was coming. The first subtle shift happened during a mandatory family dinner at Dad and Diane's house. Jennifer arrived late, practically glowing, as she announced she and her boyfriend Tyler were expecting a baby. "We're due in 7 months, she gushed, accepting Diane's tearful embrace. "You're going to be grandparents." I offered sincere congratulations, even while noting how Dad beamed with pride, in a way he rarely did for my professional accomplishments. As everyone celebrated, Diane turned to me with an oddly calculating smile. "It's such a blessing when a house gets to welcome a new generation, don't you think, Rebecca? Nothing brings life to a home like children's laughter." I nodded politely, not yet understanding. This was the first strike in a carefully orchestrated campaign. A week later, Dad called unexpectedly, his voice casual. "That house of yours must feel awfully empty with just you rattling around in it. 4 bedrooms for one person seems excessive, don't you think?" "I use the second bedroom as a home office," I replied, confused by his sudden interest in my living arrangements. "And the others are guest rooms." He said, before changing the subject abruptly. 2 days after that call, I received a text from Jennifer asking if we could meet for dinner. Believing she simply wanted to share more about her pregnancy, I suggested Angelo's, a cozy Italian restaurant downtown. Throughout our meal, Jennifer repeatedly steered the conversation toward my house, asking oddly specific questions about the backyard dimensions and whether the homeowners association had rules about play structures. "Tyler and I are house hunting," she explained, twirling spaghetti around her fork. "We're looking at properties similar to yours, actually. Something with character, you know. A real family home. Victorian homes require a lot of maintenance," I cautioned, still not sensing the danger. "And the heating bills in winter are no joke." She leaned forward, her expression suddenly intense. "But it must be worth it, right? Living somewhere with such history, knowing it's actually yours." There was something in her tone when she emphasized yours that should have alarmed me. The following week, I came home from work early with a migraine and was surprised to see Dad's car parked outside my house. I found him in my backyard with a contractor I'd never met, both men studying the exterior of my kitchen. "Dad? What's going on?" he startled, looking momentarily guilty before recovering. "Oh, Rebecca, I was just getting some advice about Jennifer's place. Their kitchen layout is similar to yours." "They bought a house already?" I asked, confused since Jennifer hadn't mentioned this during our dinner. No, he backpedaled. "Just gathering ideas for when they do." The contractor nodded awkwardly and excused himself, leaving me with more questions than answers. That weekend, I received 3 separate calls from contractors I'd never contacted, all confirming appointments to give estimates on the nursery renovation. When I explained they must have the wrong number, one particularly frustrated contractor insisted he'd spoken directly with the homeowner's father, who had described my address perfectly. My unease grew when I arrived home one evening to find Diane's car pulling out of my driveway. She waved casually as though there was nothing unusual about being at my house when I wasn't home. When I texted to ask why she'd been there, she replied vaguely about dropping off some magazines you might like. Magazines I never found. During a rare Sunday brunch with Dad, Diane, Jennifer, and Tyler at their favorite country club. Diane couldn't stop talking about Jennifer's pregnancy. "We've been looking at nursery ideas," she said, showing me photos on her phone of elaborate baby rooms. "I think the east-facing bedroom would be perfect. Morning sun is so gentle for a baby." "East-facing bedroom?" I asked. "In which house?" Something flickered across her face before she smiled. "Oh, in whatever house they end up buying, of course." As she continued scrolling through photos, I distinctly heard her murmur to Jennifer, "The crown molding is identical. It would work perfectly. My crown molding in my east-facing bedroom." Still, I dismissed my concerns as paranoia. These were microaggressions, not outright threats. Perhaps I was being overly sensitive or reading too much into innocent comments. Then Jennifer called, her voice sweet as honey. "Becca, I have a huge favor to ask. The apartment Tyler and I are in is so small, and we've started getting baby gifts already. Would you mind if we stored some things in your spare room temporarily? Just until we find our own place?" Against my better judgment, I agreed. Jennifer and Tyler arrived that weekend with what seemed like reasonable amounts of baby items. A disassembled crib, boxes of clothes, and some decorative items. As they arranged everything in my smallest guest room, I overheard Tyler whisper, "This room is perfect. We won't have to change a thing." That night, after they left, I stood in the doorway of that room, staring at the baby items now occupying the space. A terrible suspicion began forming in my mind. But surely, I thought, I was overreacting. Family wouldn't do that to family. How wrong I was. The architecture conference in Chicago was supposed to be a 3-day respite from the growing tension I felt around my family. I had scheduled presentations to attend throughout the weekend, networking events in the evenings, and was looking forward to connecting with colleagues from across the country. But when the keynote speaker canceled due to illness and several sessions were rescheduled, I decided to return home a day early. That decision would reveal the betrayal that had been meticulously planned behind my back for months. As my taxi turned onto my street Sunday afternoon, I saw it, a large moving truck parked directly in front of my house, its back doors open wide. Men in uniform were carrying furniture inside. Furniture I didn't recognize. For a moment, I wondered if they had the wrong address. "Wait here," I told the driver, my heart beginning to race as I exited the car. Walking up my own driveway felt surreal. The front door stood wide open, and I could hear voices inside, familiar voices. I stepped onto the porch, just as my father emerged, carrying a box labeled Jennifer's Books. The shock on his face would have been comical in any other circumstance. "Rebecca, you're back early." Before I could respond, Diane appeared behind him, her expression shifting from surprise to cold determination in an instant. "Well, this is unfortunate timing," she said, smoothing her blouse with practiced composure. "What are you doing in my house?" I demanded, trying to push past them to enter. Dad stepped aside awkwardly, but Diane remained planted in the doorway. "There's been a change of plans regarding the house," she stated, as though announcing a minor alteration to dinner reservations. "What are you talking about? This is my house. My name is on the deed." I reached for the door handle, only to realize the familiar brass fixture had been replaced with a sleek silver one I'd never seen before. "I don't have time for this," I muttered, digging through my purse for my keys. When I tried to insert my key, it wouldn't fit. The realization hit me like a physical blow. "You changed my locks? You actually changed the locks to my house?" Jennifer appeared in the doorway then, one hand protectively placed over her slightly rounded belly. "Becca, please don't make this difficult. We tried to do this while you were away, to make it easier for everyone." "Make what easier?" My voice rose in disbelief. "Breaking into my house, moving my things. Where is my stuff?" "Your personal items have been carefully packed," Diane explained with infuriating calmness. "They're in storage units we've rented for you. Very secure, I assure you." A moving man brushed past me, carrying what was unmistakably a crib. The same one Jennifer had supposedly been storing in my guest room. "Rebecca, be reasonable." Dad finally spoke, his eyes unable to meet mine. "Jennifer is starting a family. They need the stability of a proper home, and I don't. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This is my proper home. Grandma left it to me. About that, Diane interjected smoothly. There have been some adjustments to the inheritance situation. What adjustments? You can't just adjust a legal will. Actually, we filed paperwork indicating the property was abandoned. She continued, as though explaining something to a child. You're rarely here, always traveling for work. Meanwhile, Jennifer has been maintaining the property, collecting mail, keeping it lived in. The pieces suddenly clicked into horrifying place. The unexplained visits, the questions about my travel schedule, the stored baby items, establishing Jennifer's presence in the house. That's complete fiction and you know it, I hissed. I live here. I've been renovating for 3 years. We have documentation showing Jennifer has been the primary resident for months, Diane countered. And multiple witnesses who can attest to seeing her here regularly while you were elsewhere. I turned to Jennifer, who at least had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable. You've been planning this all this time. The universe has a way of putting people where they belong, she replied with practiced serenity, the phrase sounding like something Diane would coach her to say. This house should be filled with family, with children. You're so focused on your career, you'd never appreciate it the way we will. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that I could barely breathe. Neighbors were beginning to gather on the sidewalk, watching the confrontation unfold. I'm calling the police, I stated, pulling out my phone with shaking hands. That would be inadvisable, Diane replied coolly. We have paperwork showing our legal occupancy. It would be your word against ours. And quite frankly, you appear unstable. At the moment, Dad finally stepped forward, lowering his voice. Rebecca, please, it's for the best. We can help you find a nice condo downtown, closer to your office. Something more suited to your lifestyle. The way he said lifestyle, as though my choices were somehow inferior to Jennifer's, broke something inside me. This man who was supposed to protect me, who had once carried me on his shoulders and promised to always keep me safe, was actively participating in stealing my home. Get out of my way, I demanded, attempting once more to enter. This time Tyler appeared, his broad shoulders blocking the doorway. I think you should leave, Rebecca. Jennifer doesn't need this stress in her condition. Her condition, this is my house. Not anymore, Diane stated with finality. The utilities have already been transferred to our names. Your mail has been forwarded to your office address. We've even spoken with the neighbors about the situation. Horror washed over me as I glanced at the onlookers. Had my own family been poisoning my community against me? What situation? I asked, dreading the answer. Just that you've been struggling lately, Jennifer explained with false sympathy. After losing your boyfriend and having those episodes. Everyone understands, you need time to heal. I hadn't lost any boyfriend. There had been no episodes. They were fabricating an entire narrative to justify their theft. You're all insane, I whispered, backing away. This isn't over. It is though, Diane called after me as I stumbled back to the waiting taxi. For your own good, Rebecca. Sometimes family has to step in when someone can't see what's best for them. That night, alone in a sterile hotel room, I received calls from 3 different family friends, expressing concern about my well-being. Each conversation revealed another layer of the elaborate lies my family had spread. That I'd suffered a nervous breakdown. That I'd offered my house to Jennifer during a moment of clarity. That I was now regretting my generosity due to emotional instability. They had planned every detail, anticipated every obstacle. They had systematically turned my community against me while pretending to care about my welfare. The final blow came in an email from my utility companies confirming service transfers to new account holders, Robert, Diane, and Jennifer Morgan. They had actually listed all 3 of themselves, erasing any trace of my ownership. I curled into a ball on the hotel bed, feeling more alone than I had since the day my mother died. The betrayal was so complete, so meticulously executed, that, for a brief, terrible moment, I wondered if I was indeed losing my mind. But then I remembered. My grandmother had faced challenges too. She had raised my mother alone after my grandfather abandoned them. She had rebuilt her life through sheer determination. "There's power in these walls," she had told me. "They remember all of us. I would find that power again, even if the walls themselves had been stolen from me." 3 days into my involuntary exile, I sat cross-legged on the hotel bed, surrounded by hastily purchased clothes and toiletries. Everything I owned, from my mother's wedding photos to the architectural awards I'd earned, was locked inside storage units whose locations Diane refused to disclose. My phone pinged with an email notification from Jennifer. "Thought you might like to see how we're making the nursery cozy. Hope you're feeling better. XO." Attached were photos of my grandmother's guest room, the one with the hand-painted ceiling medallion I'd carefully restored, now stripped of its vintage charm and painted a garish yellow. The antique vanity where my mother once sat brushing. Her hair had been replaced with a changing table. My things were gone, erased as thoroughly as if I'd never existed in that space. I threw my phone across the room, where it hit the wall and clattered to the floor. Then came the tears. Deep, guttural sobs that seemed to rise from the very core of my being. I cried for my grandmother, who had trusted me to preserve her legacy. I cried for my mother, whose memory was being desecrated in that house. Mostly, I cried for myself, for the naive belief that blood meant loyalty. When the tears finally subsided, I retrieved my phone, half hoping it was broken so I wouldn't have to see any more evidence of the theft of my life. But the screen illuminated with another notification. A voicemail from my cousin Sarah. "Rebecca, I just heard from Aunt Meredith about your situation." Her voice was hesitant, uncomfortable. "Dad says you've been having some troubles lately. Mental health is nothing to be ashamed of, sweetie. We're all grateful Jennifer stepped up to take care of the house, while you get the help you need. Call me if you want to talk." Mental health? What lies had they been spreading? I called Sarah immediately, desperate to correct whatever fiction my family had created. "Sarah, I'm not having mental health issues. They've stolen my house. They changed the locks while I was at a conference and moved all my things out." Her silence spoke volumes. "Becca," she finally said, using the nickname from our childhood. "Uncle Robert said you might say something like this." He explained how you've been struggling since Grandma Eleanor died. How you've been having paranoid episodes. That's completely fabricated. I've never had episodes of any kind. They're gaslighting you, just like they're trying to gaslight me. Dad mentioned you might use that word. Gaslighting. He said the therapist explained it's a common deflection tactic. The therapist? What therapist? There is no therapist, Sarah. I swear to you, I'm perfectly fine. They're making this all up to justify stealing my inheritance. Her sigh was heavy with pity. "Becca, we all saw how much you changed after Grandma died. The isolation, the obsession with the house, and now Jennifer's pregnant, starting a real family, while you're alone with your projects. It's understandable you might feel some resentment." Every word was like a knife. They had been methodically poisoning my entire extended family against me for months, perhaps years, laying the groundwork for this moment. "I'm coming to visit you next week," Sarah continued. "Maybe we can talk face to face then. In the meantime, please consider the outpatient program Aunt Diane mentioned. Everyone just wants what's best for you." After we hung up, I sat in stunned silence. How deep did this conspiracy go? Had they really convinced my entire family I was mentally unstable? The answer came in a group text from my father. "Family meeting tomorrow regarding Rebecca's care plan going forward. 7 p.m. at our house." Our house, not my house that they had stolen, but their house, where I was apparently to be discussed as though I were an unruly child or an infirm elder, incapable of managing my own affairs. I didn't respond. Instead, I drove to my office, the only place that remained untouched by their manipulations. As I sat at my desk, surrounded by blueprints and models, my phone rang. My father, likely realizing I'd seen his text. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Rebecca, we need to talk about next steps." He began without preamble. "Next steps for what exactly?" "Your grand theft of my home. Your character assassination campaign." He sighed heavily. "This is exactly why we're concerned. These paranoid accusations, this hostility. It's not paranoia when you've literally stolen my house, Dad. You change my locks. You move my things without permission. That's not paranoia. That's stating facts. Rebecca, listen to yourself. His voice took on that patronizing tone I'd come to loathe. This is Grandma Eleanor's house we're talking about. The family home. It was never just yours. It belongs to all of us, to our family legacy. That's not what Grandma's will said. She left it specifically to me. You know your grandmother wasn't thinking clearly in her final months. Jennifer has documented how you manipulated Eleanor when she was vulnerable. The accusation was so outrageous, so completely inverted from reality, that I couldn't form words for several seconds. I would never manipulate Grandma. She was like a mother to me after Mom died. While you were busy starting your new family with Diane, Grandma was the only one who stood by me. That's your perception, he replied coolly. But Jennifer has journals, documenting your increasingly erratic behavior during that time. How you isolated Eleanor from the rest of the family. How you convinced her to change her will. Journals. Jennifer had barely known my grandmother. They'd met perhaps a dozen times at family functions, where Jennifer had shown minimal interest in an elderly woman she had no blood relation to. This is insane, I whispered, genuine fear beginning to creep in. You're creating elaborate fictions to steal what's legally mine. No one is stealing anything, Rebecca. We're protecting family assets while you get the help you need. I don't need help. I need my house back. Your obsession with the house is exactly the problem, he countered. A healthy person wouldn't be this fixated on a material possession. It's not just a possession. It's my heritage, my connection to Mom and Grandma. His voice softened artificially. I understand you feel that way. But Jennifer needs stability for her baby, your niece or nephew. Surely you want what's best for the next generation. The manipulation was so transparent, it made me nauseous. Don't you dare use Jennifer's pregnancy to justify theft. Rebecca. His tone turned icy. If you continue with these accusations, we'll have no choice but to pursue legal guardianship. The family unanimously agrees you're not currently capable of making sound decisions. Legal guardianship. They were threatening to have me declared incompetent? You wouldn't dare, I breathed, though I was no longer certain of any boundaries this man wouldn't cross. It's not what we want, he continued. But if you keep fighting this reasonable family decision, you'll leave us no choice. Jennifer deserves this house more than you do. She's continuing the family line, creating the future Eleanor would have wanted. Something in me snapped at his invocation of my grandmother. Don't you speak her name. Don't you dare pretend to know what she would have wanted. Your mother would have wanted this too, Rebecca, he said, delivering the final cruelest blow. Catherine would have wanted her grandchild to grow up in her childhood home. I ended the call, my entire body shaking with rage and grief, and something else, pure, undiluted fear. They were trying to erase me, to rewrite not just the present, but the past itself. If I fought them directly, they would use it as evidence of my supposed instability. For hours, I sat at my desk staring at nothing, tears silently tracking down my face. The depth of the betrayal was unfathomable. The people who should have protected me were conspiring to destroy me. As darkness fell outside my office window, I reached the lowest point of despair I'd ever experienced. Perhaps I should just let them win. Walk away from the house, from the memories, from the family that had turned against me so completely. Maybe I could start fresh somewhere, build a new life untainted by their treachery. Then my eyes fell on a business card, tucked into my desk drawer. Harold Winters, attorney at law. My grandmother's lawyer, who had handled her will. I'd kept his card after the will reading, though I'd had no reason to contact him since. With trembling fingers, I picked up the card, remembering something my grandmother had once told me during one of our long afternoons together on her porch. Becca, my darling girl, the world isn't always kind to women who stand alone. People mistake our independence for weakness, our boundaries for selfishness. Never let anyone convince you to make yourself smaller for their comfort. And if they try, fight like hell. I reached for my phone, a new resolve forming through the tears. It was time to fight like hell. The offices of Winters and Associates, occupied the entire 15th floor of a downtown building with views of the river. The reception area featured leather chairs, walnut paneling, and discreet lighting that spoke of old money and established power. I felt wildly out of place in my hastily purchased outfit from the department store near my hotel. Ms. Morgan. Harold Winters emerged from his office, extending both hands to grasp mine. I was deeply concerned by your call. Please, come in. At 72, Harold maintained the sharp alertness that had made him one of the city's most respected estate attorneys. He had been my grandmother's friend for decades before becoming her legal counsel. Tell me everything, he instructed, once we were seated in his office. Leave nothing out. For the next hour, I detailed the systematic campaign my family had waged. The lockout, the manufactured evidence of abandonment, the character assassination, the threats of pursuing guardianship. Harold took meticulous notes, his expression growing increasingly grave. This is far more serious than I initially understood, he said when I finished. What they've done constitutes multiple criminal offenses: breaking and entering, conversion of property, fraud, possibly even elder abuse. Regarding claims about your grandmother's capacity, can they really claim I abandoned the property when I was only gone for 3 days? Harold shook his head. Absolutely not. Abandonment requires clear intent to surrender property rights, typically demonstrated by extended absence and neglect. 3 days at a conference doesn't remotely qualify. But they told everyone I offered the house to Jennifer. They've been telling the family I'm mentally unstable. Slander and defamation, he noted, adding to his list. Particularly egregious, given they're using these false claims to legitimize theft. I twisted my hands in my lap. They seem so confident about their paperwork. Could they have filed something legal I don't know about? Anything they filed, without your knowledge, would be fraudulent, Harold assured me. But I'll have my team check every county record immediately to see what we're dealing with. He leaned forward, his expression softening slightly. Rebecca, there's something you should know. Your grandmother was a remarkably perceptive woman. What do you mean? Eleanor suspected something like this might eventually happen. She was concerned about your father's influence by his new wife, and particularly troubled by some comments made about the house. My heart quickened. What did she do? She built safeguards into her estate, planning that we didn't discuss at the initial reading. I have a sealed letter she left with instructions to open it only in case of a contested inheritance. He crossed to a wall safe, hidden behind a landscape painting, and retrieved a thick envelope. I believe now qualifies. With reverent care, he broke the seal and unfolded several pages of my grandmother's distinctive handwriting. As he read, his expression shifted from concentration to something like grim satisfaction. Your grandmother, he said, looking up, was extraordinarily thorough. She anticipated potential claims against her competency, so she underwent comprehensive cognitive assessment before finalizing her will. The results, showing her to be of completely sound mind, are notarized and included here. Relief washed through me. So they can't claim she was manipulated. No. Furthermore, she installed security cameras in the house 3 years before her death. Discreet ones in the common areas. She noted the control panel is hidden in a compartment behind the upstairs linen closet. I gasped. The cameras might still be working. They could show I was actively living there, not abandoning anything. Exactly. And there's more. Harold continued reading. Eleanor established a secondary trust, triggered only in case of a contested inheritance. This trust contains additional funds specifically earmarked for legal defense of the property. With me named as trustee, tears sprang to my eyes. Even from beyond, my grandmother was protecting me. She knew, I whispered. She sensed they might try something like this. Eleanor was perceptive. Harold agreed. But I don't think even she anticipated this level of deceit. What your family has done goes beyond opportunism. It's calculated criminal activity. For the next 2 weeks, Harold and his team worked tirelessly. They discovered fraudulent paperwork filed by my father, claiming power of attorney based on my alleged diminished capacity. Paperwork that included forged signatures from doctors I'd never met. They documented the illegal lockout, filed emergency motions to prevent my family from selling or damaging the property, and petitioned for access to retrieve the security camera footage. When we finally gained court-supervised access to check the security system, I held my breath as Harold's tech specialist accessed the control panel. To our immense relief, not only were the cameras functional, but they had been actively recording to a secure cloud server my grandmother had set up. Years of footage documenting my continuous residence, my careful renovations, and, most damningly, my family's unauthorized entries during my absence. The footage from the weekend of the lockout was particularly damning. It clearly showed my father using a copied key to let movers in, Diane directing the removal and storage of my possessions, and Jennifer touring the empty rooms with decorators. All while I was demonstrably out of town. Armed with this evidence, Harold arranged a meeting at his office, sending formal legal notices to my father, Diane, and Jennifer, requiring their attendance. Do we really have to face them? I asked the morning of the meeting, my stomach churning at the thought of seeing them again. It's strategically advantageous, Harold explained. We'll present the evidence directly, making clear the criminal exposure they face. This gives them the opportunity to remedy the situation voluntarily before we escalate to criminal charges. And if they refuse, his smile was cold, then we proceed with both criminal charges and civil action, ensuring the consequences are as severe as legally possible. When my family arrived at Harold's office, their confident expressions quickly faltered upon seeing the assembled legal team waiting for them. My father had brought his own attorney, a nervous-looking younger man who kept checking his watch. "What's this about, Rebecca?" Dad demanded, ignoring Harold completely. "More of your paranoid accusations. Please be seated," Harold instructed, coldly. "We have much to discuss." Once they reluctantly complied, Harold nodded to his assistant, who distributed folders containing selected evidence. "Mr. and Mrs. Morgan, Ms. Jennifer Morgan," Harold began formally. "You are here to address serious criminal and civil violations committed against my client, Rebecca Morgan. These include, but are not limited to, breaking and entering, illegal, lockout, conversion of property, filing of fraudulent documents, defamation, and criminal conspiracy." "This is ridiculous," Diane scoffed, though I noticed she hadn't opened her folder. Rebecca offered the house to Jennifer. "We have witnesses. Please, examine the contents of your folders," Harold continued calmly. "You'll find timestamped security footage showing your unauthorized entry to Ms. Morgan's residence on April 15th. Your direction of moving personnel, removing her possessions without consent, and your changing of locks to prevent her lawful re-entry." The blood drained from my father's face as he flipped through the photos extracted from the security footage. Jennifer's hand went protectively to her stomach, her default pose whenever she felt threatened. Additionally, Harold continued, "We have documentation of fraudulent paperwork filed with the county clerk bearing forged signatures. We've already spoken with Dr. Jameson and Dr. Harley, who confirmed they never evaluated Rebecca Morgan and certainly never declared her incompetent." My father's attorney leaned over to whisper urgently in his ear. Diane's composure finally cracked as she began frantically flipping through the evidence. "You illegally took possession of a property valued at $3.2 million, Harold stated, his voice hard. "You removed and concealed personal property valued at approximately $250,000. You filed fraudulent, legal documents and made defamatory statements to family members and neighbors suggesting Ms. Morgan was mentally incompetent." He paused, letting the magnitude sink in. "These actions constitute multiple felonies, carrying potential sentences of up to 20 years imprisonment. We are prepared to pursue both criminal prosecution and civil damages to the fullest extent of the law." "This is a family misunderstanding," my father finally sputtered. "There's no need for such aggressive legal threats." "A misunderstanding." I found my voice at last, surprising myself with its steadiness. "You changed my locks. You took my home. You told everyone I was mentally ill. You threatened to have me declared legally incompetent. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a coordinated attack." Jennifer began to cry, loud theatrical sobs that once might have moved me. "We just wanted a home for the baby. You don't even want children. The house would be empty without a family. I am family, I shouted, years of dismissal erupting at once. I am Eleanor and Catherine's family. That house isn't just walls and a roof. It's their legacy to me. You had no right to decide it should be yours instead. Harold placed a calming hand on my arm before addressing my family again. We are prepared to offer one opportunity to resolve this without criminal charges. He outlined the terms: immediate return of all property, full restoration of any modifications made to the house, signed admissions of wrongdoing, public retractions of all defamatory statements, and significant financial compensation for emotional distress and legal fees. And if we refuse, Diane challenged, though her voice lacked its usual confidence. Then, by 5 p.m. today, we file criminal charges with the district attorney, who has already reviewed the preliminary evidence and expressed significant interest in the case. We also file civil actions seeking treble damages, which would likely exceed $10 million. My father's attorney whispered frantically to him again. We need time to consider these demands. My father finally said, You have until 5 p.m. Harold replied implacably. Not a minute longer. As they gathered their things to leave, I rose from my chair, finding strength I hadn't known I possessed. Dad, I said quietly, causing him to pause at the door. Mom and Grandma would be heartbroken to see what you've become. He couldn't meet my eyes as he walked out. By 4:30 that afternoon, Harold received their signed agreement to all terms. By evening, I had my keys back. By the following day, movers were returning my possessions from storage. The house that had been taken from me, through betrayal, was returned through justice. But nothing would ever be the same again. The legal victory proved merely the beginning of consequences my family faced for their actions. Despite avoiding criminal charges through our settlement, word spread quickly throughout our community. The terms of our agreement required them to make formal retractions to everyone they had told their fabricated stories about my mental state. These mandatory confessions proved particularly devastating for Diane, who had built her social standing on carefully curated appearances. Having to admit to orchestrating the theft of her stepdaughter's inheritance shattered the respectable image she'd constructed over 2 decades. Did you hear about Diane Morgan? Became the whispered introduction to conversations all over town. They tried to steal Rebecca's house by claiming she was mentally unstable, had to retract everything, and pay a fortune in damages. 3 of Dad's longtime business partners severed ties with his real estate firm within a month, unwilling to be associated with someone of questionable ethics. 2 major development deals fell through when investors expressed concerns about his judgment and character issues. One Tuesday afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor at my newly secured home. Tyler, Jennifer's boyfriend, looking uncomfortable on my porch. Can we talk? He asked, shifting from foot to foot. Against my better judgment, I invited him in, curious about what could prompt this visit. Jennifer and I broke up, he revealed, declining my offer of coffee. I knew they were helping us look for houses, but I never agreed to stealing yours. When I realized what they'd done, he shook his head. I couldn't be part of a family that operates that way. What about the baby? I asked, despite myself. I'll co-parent, of course. But I can't build a life with someone who thinks it's acceptable to take what isn't hers and destroy others in the process. After he left, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Vindication, that at least one person recognized the moral bankruptcy of their actions. Sadness for the innocent child who would be born into such dysfunction. And a strange sense of closure. The financial consequences proved equally significant, beyond the substantial settlement they paid me. The legal fees they accrued defending themselves against potential criminal charges depleted their savings. Dad was forced to sell their vacation home in Naples and liquidate investment accounts to cover their debts. 2 months after regaining my home, I discovered another of my grandmother's foresight measures. The security system that had proved so crucial to my case hadn't been her only precaution. Eleanor had established a separate trust fund, specifically for the house's preservation, accessible only by me and untouchable by any other family member. The trust contained sufficient funds to maintain the property for decades and included specific provisions preventing the house from ever being transferred to my father or his descendants. As I read through the trust documents with Harold, I found a sealed envelope with my name written in my grandmother's elegant script. Inside was a letter dated just 3 months before her death. My dearest Rebecca, if you're reading this, then my suspicions proved justified. I've watched Robert change since your mother's passing, witnessed his increasing deference to Diane's influence and ambitions. The way they look at this house, with calculation rather than appreciation for its history, troubles me deeply. Your mother and I both recognized your natural affinity for this home. The way you understand it's more than just a structure, but a vessel for memories and traditions. You belong here, continuing the line of strong women who have maintained these walls, not just as shelter, but as sanctuary. Should anyone attempt to take this legacy from you, remember that true strength isn't measured by aggression, but by perseverance. Stand firm in your rightful place. The house knows to whom it belongs. All my love, Grandma Eleanor. That night, I walked through each room of my reclaimed home, running my fingers along the banister. My grandmother had mentioned that first difficult year after Mom died. The house did feel different now, battle-scarred in ways invisible to the eye, but present in every corner where my family's betrayal had played out. The following week, I hired a new security company to install a state-of-the-art system with biometric entry requirements. I consulted with Harold about additional legal protections and transferred the property into an ironclad trust that would prevent any future attempts to contest my ownership. The east-facing bedroom that Jennifer had designated as a nursery required the most restoration. They had painted over the custom millwork, removed the antique fixtures, and begun converting it to an infant's room. I hired artisans to carefully restore the original features, transforming it into a home library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a window seat overlooking the garden. One evening, as workers were completing the library renovation, the foreman called me upstairs. "Ms. Morgan, we found something unusual behind this panel." Hidden in a recessed compartment in the wall was an ornate wooden box I'd never seen before. Inside lay a collection of my mother's journals, dating from her childhood through her final illness, alongside photographs I'd believed lost forever. The discovery felt like a gift, as though the house itself had protected these treasures until I had secured my place within its walls. That night, I stayed up until dawn, reading my mother's words, hearing her voice in my mind as I traced her handwriting with my fingertips. 6 months after the confrontation, Dad attempted reconciliation. He arrived unannounced one Sunday afternoon, looking noticeably aged. "Rebecca," he began awkwardly when I reluctantly allowed him onto the porch, but not inside. "I've come to apologize." "For which part?" I asked coldly. "The theft? The lies about my mental health? Using Mom's memory against me?" He flinched at each accusation. "For all of it. I got caught up in Diane's plans. She convinced me you didn't appreciate the house the way Jennifer would, that it was wasted on you, and you believed that was sufficient reason to steal my inheritance and destroy my reputation." "I was wrong," he admitted, staring at his shoes. "Terribly, unforgivably wrong. I've left Diane, filed for divorce last month. What we did to you, what I allowed to happen, I can't live with myself." For a moment, I felt a flicker of the daughter I once was, the girl who had adored her father, who had forgiven his emotional distance after Mom died, who had tried so hard to maintain some connection, even as he built his new family. But that girl was gone, replaced by a woman who understood that some betrayals cannot be undone with words alone. "I'm glad you recognize what you did," I said finally. "But an apology doesn't erase the consequences. You showed me exactly who you are and what I'm worth to you. I believe you. Rebecca, please. You're my daughter, my only child." "No," I corrected him gently but firmly. "I was your daughter. Now I'm just someone who used to know you." As he walked back to his car, shoulders slumped in defeat, I felt no satisfaction, only the quiet certainty that I was protecting myself from people who had proven themselves dangerous to my well-being. That night, I invited friends over for the first dinner party I'd hosted since reclaiming my home. These weren't childhood friends or family connections, but people I'd chosen. Colleagues who had supported me during the ordeal. Neighbors who had expressed outrage at my family's actions. New acquaintances who knew me as I was now, not as an extension of family dynamics. As we gathered around my grandmother's restored dining table, raising glasses in a toast to new beginnings, I realized I had gained far more than I had lost. The betrayal had stripped away illusions about family obligation and revealed the importance of chosen connections based on mutual respect rather than mere biology. The house felt alive with laughter and honest friendship, perhaps more truly itself than it had been in years. As my guests departed, my new neighbor Catherine lingered behind to help with cleanup. "This house has such good energy," she commented, carefully handling my grandmother's crystal. "You can feel how much it's been loved." "It's been through a battle recently," I admitted. "We both have," she smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "The best homes always show their scars. It means they've been lived in, fought for." As we worked side by side in comfortable silence, I felt something unexpected bloom in my chest. Not just healing from what had been broken, but something entirely new. The house my grandmother had entrusted to me stood firm, its foundations unshaken despite the storm that had passed through. And I stood with it, no longer merely its inheritor, but its true guardian, earned through fire and reclamation. 1 year after the day I returned home to find strangers in my house, I stood in my garden planting tulip bulbs along the stone pathway. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke. As I pressed each bulb into the dark soil, an act of faith in future blooms, the house behind me bore little resemblance to the battleground it had once become. Room by room, I had reclaimed and transformed each space, healing both the physical structure and my relationship with it. The library now housed not only my mother's recovered journals, but also my own growing collection of architectural books and personal writings. The kitchen had been restored to its original warmth, with modern conveniences discreetly incorporated. The garden, once my grandmother's pride, flourished again under my care. Physical restoration proved far simpler than emotional healing. For months after regaining my home, I'd suffered nightmares about returning to find locks changed again, my possessions vanished, my existence erased. I'd wake gasping for breath, needing to walk through each room, confirming my place within these walls. On my therapist's suggestion, a real therapist, not the fictional one my family had invented, I began journaling about the experience, exercising the betrayal through words on paper. Initially, each entry burned with rage and hurt, but gradually something shifted. The raw pain gave way to something more nuanced, understanding without excusing, acknowledging the wound without letting it define me. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. Dr. Winters, no relation to my attorney, reminded me during our sessions. It means integrating the experience into your life story without allowing it to become your entire identity. Those words resonated deeply. I didn't want to be forever defined as the woman whose family tried to steal her house. I was so much more than the betrayal I had suffered. The lawsuit settlement had included substantial compensation beyond covering my legal fees. After careful consideration, I used a portion to establish a foundation supporting housing security initiatives and legal aid for vulnerable property owners, transforming my personal injury into community benefit. I maintained no contact with Diane or Jennifer, though I occasionally received updates through mutual acquaintances. Their deception had cost them dearly. Diane, divorced from my father and socially ostracized, had moved to another state. Jennifer had delivered a healthy baby boy, but struggled as a single mother after Tyler's departure, eventually moving into a small apartment in her mother's new city. My father made periodic attempts at reconciliation. Cards on my birthday, emails about mundane topics, as though we were merely casual acquaintances who had drifted apart rather than participants in a fundamental breach of trust. I never responded. Some broken things cannot be mended, and sometimes healing requires permanent boundaries. 6 months into my recovery journey, I was selecting produce at the farmer's market when I heard a familiar voice. Jennifer stood at the adjacent stall, a baby carrier, strapped to her chest. She looked exhausted. The confident glow of her previous life dimmed considerably. Our eyes met across pyramids of apples. For a breathless moment, I thought she might pretend not to see me, but instead, she approached cautiously. "Rebecca," she said softly. I didn't know you shopped here." The baby in the carrier blinked sleepily up at me, an innocent witness to adult complications. "Every Saturday," I replied neutrally. An awkward silence stretched between us until she spoke again. I wanted to say, "What we did was unforgivable. I know that. There's no excuse." I studied her face, searching for the calculation I'd missed before. Instead, I found only exhaustion and what appeared to be genuine regret. "No," I agreed. "There isn't." She nodded, eyes downcast. "Mom and I lost everything. Not just money and reputation, but ourselves, I think. I don't recognize the person who did those things to you. I don't understand how I justified it." The baby made a small sound, and she automatically adjusted his position. "Your son is beautiful," I offered, feeling no need to twist the knife into her evident difficulties. "Thank you," she whispered. "His name is Tyler, after his dad. We're managing. I hope you both find your way," I said, meaning it despite everything. Her child deserved better than to inherit the toxic patterns our family had perpetuated. As I watched her walk away, shoulders slightly bowed under the weight of consequences, I realized something profound had shifted within me. The rage that had sustained me through fighting for my home had transformed into something quieter but more enduring. The knowledge that justice had been served without my becoming cruel in turn. Back at home, I poured a cup of tea and settled into the window seat overlooking the garden. My neighbor, Catherine, who had gradually become more than just a neighbor, would be arriving later for dinner. Our friendship had blossomed slowly, built on shared interests in historic architecture and contemporary fiction, strengthened by her understanding of boundaries and respect for my healing process. The house felt different now. Not just mine through inheritance or legal victory, but mine through conscious choice and dedicated protection. Each room held memories, both painful and precious, but the painful ones no longer dominated. My grandmother had been right about the power in these walls. They had witnessed betrayal, yes, but also resilience. They had sheltered 4 generations of women in my family, through joy and sorrow, through births and deaths, through celebrations and conflicts. Now they sheltered me, as I built a life on my own terms, not defined by relationships to others, but grounded in my own values and choices. The most profound lesson of this ordeal wasn't about property rights or legal victories, though these mattered deeply. It was about distinguishing between the family we're born into and the connections we choose to nurture. It was about recognizing that sometimes the healthiest love we can offer ourselves is the courage to walk away from those who cannot respect our boundaries, even when those people share our blood. Houses, after all, are just structures of wood and stone. They can be built, destroyed, stolen, reclaimed, but our sense of self, our understanding of what we deserve and what we will not tolerate, that is the true foundation upon which we build our lives. As the evening light cast long shadows across my garden, I ran my hand along the windowsill, where my mother once sat, reading stories to me, where my grandmother later taught me to identify birds at the feeder, where I now created new traditions of my own. The wood felt warm beneath my fingers, alive with history, yet open to future chapters. Some might view my story as one of loss, the severing of family ties, the end of certain relationships, but I've come to see it differently. When we remove what harms us, we create space for what helps us grow. By closing doors that led only to pain, I opened windows to possibilities I'd never imagined. Have you ever had to rebuild after betrayal? What helped you heal when those you trusted let you down? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. If my story resonated with you, consider subscribing for more reflections on family, boundaries, and finding strength in unexpected places. Thank you for listening to my journey. May you find the courage to protect what matters most in your own life.